Matthew Perna was 37 years old when he put a rope around his neck and took his own life. For more than a year, U.S. leaders and media had shamed him and many others for the sin of supporting President Donald Trump and going into the Capitol on January 6. Perna never hurt anyone and never tried to overthrow the government, but his family said he may as well have done both. In the court of public opinion, he was a condemned man, guilty by association, and the Department of Justice wanted him locked up for minor acts of civil disobedience that would normally merit a slap on the wrist. After being at their mercy for over a year, Perna was suicidal, and the DOJ, who'd requested his medical records, knew it. Then, out of nowhere, prosecutors decided to seek years more jail time. Those closest to Matthew Perna said it was the final blow. To learn more, we traveled to Sharpsville, a small town of iron and steel in western Pennsylvania, where his family had lived since they fled Mussolini's Italy more than a century ago. And we met up with his best friend, Marcus Priester, who told us Matthew Perna had rotted away from stress right before his eyes. Summer was just settling into the Shenango Valley, where the forest reaches from western Pennsylvania into Ohio, when we met up with Marcus Priester. He and Matthew Perna would come here to run the rocky dirt trails, but also to listen and be still. It was a little more than a year since his best friend had killed himself, and this time he was taking Matthew's friends and family on a pilgrimage of sorts to a clearing deep in the forest where Marcus and Matthew's Uncle Ron had scattered some of his ashes and planted a tree in his memory. Wow. This was Matt's church, huh?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Serenity. It's where he came to unplug from the hectic lives we live.
For Matthew's strongest advocate, his aunt, Jerry Perna, this journey had been a long time coming.
You know, it's strange. I feel like Matt is walking this with us.
Do you?
Yeah.
We tackled 4 miles of winding paths until we came to a place where the river runs quietly and the trees were not so thick. This is the spot he chose?
This is it. This is where he requested to be placed. Needs some water. It'll take a minute. Beautiful. It's a little dry, but it's doing okay.
Yeah, it is.
And this is his water bottle.
Wow. Did he carry that everywhere?
Drink. He did. And all these stickers on it,
Yeah.
they're from all of his travels.
Wow.
He would always just put another layer on. There's about 3 layers of stickers on there.
Really?
Yep.
The moment for Jerry, more bitter than sweet. Recalling the pain, she said, drove her nephew to an early grave.
People literally hated you that didn't even know you. They hated you. I could post something on Twitter with Matt's picture, and I can almost always count on somebody to come on and tell me that he deserved it, or he was a coward, he took the coward's way out. And it sickens me to my core, because he's dead. How much more could these people want from him? He's dead. Spitting on his grave brings you joy. I don't understand that mentality in people. I don't understand how anybody could have that much hatred in their heart that they would say things so horrible about somebody who's dead, knowing that their family member is grieving. Have they never lost anybody that was close to them? Have they never had that feeling that I feel and that my family feels and that Matt's friends feel? If you've never had that, then I feel sorry for you, because you've never known love. You've never known love if you don't feel what we're feeling about somebody we loved so much.
And Matt, I mean, he had his family, he had his friends, and he had help.
But he needed somebody to tell him what was going to happen. He needed somebody to lay it out for him. And nobody could tell him. Nobody. There wasn't one person. That's why he searched his Bible. He searched his Bible so often. His Bible is just filled with notes, and oftentimes there's sentences with a question mark on the end, asking God, why is this happening?
Sin, guilt, shame, remorse, depression.
Numb the pain, bitterness, anger. He just couldn't find the answer in this book. And after he died and we went into his home, and this was sitting on his coffee table, and I could tell that this book had been thrown many times.
All of his notes.
And they painted him out to be this person that he wasn't. And there were conversations that he was starting to believe it.
He did. He
was
started to believe
Matt,
it.
what's wrong with you, man?
In our last conversation, he said to me, they keep telling me I'm guilty, Aunt Jerry. I must be guilty. I must be guilty. I'm getting what I deserve. And I was like, what are you talking about?
The aftermath of January 6 had swept through Matthew Perna's life like a hurricane, his face all over local news, as the protest that was turned into an insurrection became a death sentence. Out of more than 1,100 arrested, less than 2% were charged with conspiring to overthrow the government. But you'd never have known from watching the news or listening to leaders on both sides of the aisle.
January 6th was the very definition of an insurrection.
It was a violent insurrection.
These were rioters and insurrectionists.
Trump incited insurrections.
The Nation Watch is insurrectionists.
Attacked by insurrectionists.
It's not protest, it's insurrection.
To mark the first anniversary of January 6, about 7 weeks before Matthew killed himself, the most powerful Justice Department official in the nation promised more arrests.
The actions we have taken thus far will not be our last.
Matthew Perna's fate lay in the hands of those sending political protesters to prison for non-violent offenses. Something they did not do to those protesting Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court in September 2018, where hundreds had the charges dropped or were ordered to pay fines around $50 under a Washington, D.C. law known as post and forfeit. Nor did it happen to those in Portland, Oregon during the summer of 2020, who night after night tried to burn down the federal courthouse with federal agents inside. Those responsible got to skip jail with no criminal record in exchange for community service and staying out of trouble for a time. Yet for January 6th, the FBI turned SWAT teams and battering rams on American citizens, often for misdemeanor crimes.
Don't touch me. This is a crime. Keep your fucking hands off me. Don't touch me. Step back over there.
And Matthew Perna felt the working-class streets of home had turned on him and his family.
His father had received hate mail, threats. This is some of the most awful things you could say about a person.
And that bothered Matthew?
It sure did. And he got to the point where he didn't feel comfortable showing his face in town. Him and I would have to drive out of town to a place where he felt more comfortable because he didn't want to show his face in the community.
That sentiment echoed in a letter his father, Larry Perna, wrote to John Bates, the judge in Matthew's case, where he said, "We were no longer comfortable going out in public, something I never in my life thought I would experience in the town where our family was respected and well known." Marcus and others close to Matthew laid much of the blame with the Sharon Herald, a local paper whose narrative they felt was one-sided, falsely cast Matthew as a threat, and after he hanged himself, altered his obituary as confirmed by the funeral home, removing 2 lines they didn't want to print. One said he was ushered in by police. The other, many people are responsible for the pain he endured. We reached out repeatedly to the Sharon Herald for comment, but no one would talk to us. As Matthew Perna's case dragged on, his family said they felt him slipping away.
He didn't want to go out with his friends. Sometimes he answered his phone, sometimes he didn't. He became a recluse, in a sense.
And if he didn't answer his phone, what would you do?
We panicked. And we kept calling.
Matthew warned his friends in text messages that were hard to read. And in his Bible, among his many notes, next to Psalm 13, he asked, "How much longer?" Some friends went to his attorney, others to police, who went to his house 3 times to check on him. The prosecutor in his case, Nihar Mohanty, requested a mental health evaluation to help his supervisors know more about Mr. Perna's mental health status. In the evaluation sent to the DOJ in July, the psychologist stated Matthew was at moderate risk of harming himself, was not aggressive, had no intent to engage in criminal behavior when he entered the Capitol, and presented no significant risk for current or future offending. That did not appear to move the DOJ, who still wanted to send Matthew Perna away for years, and refused a misdemeanor plea deal. Time and again, the prosecutor in D.C. indicated his office was calling the shots, not him. In desperation, Aunt Jerry said, after almost a year, Matthew collapsed under the weight of the Justice Department and pled guilty to 3 misdemeanors and the felony charge of obstructing an official proceeding, even though the Senate chamber was empty when Matthew walked through the Capitol building. With no criminal history and no violent crimes, Matthew Perna pinned his hopes on a sentence of months, not years, and prepared for prison. That Christmas, when he came to stay with her, Aunt Jerry said he was not the same.
And there was a picture of him and my son and I on that Christmas, that last Christmas. And every time I look at that picture and I compare it to every picture of Matt that I have prior to that, there was a sparkle in Matt's eye before. And that picture on Christmas, the day after Christmas, that picture was taken, that sparkle is gone. And it's then that I realized his spirit was dead at that point. And nothing was going to get it back.
When the news came that the DOJ at the last minute was seeking a harsher sentence that could add 5 to 7 years of jail time, Aunt Jerry said Matthew was crushed. He told Marcus and Jerry it was a terrorism enhancement. According to the DOJ, it wasn't. There's no official record because Matthew died before the paperwork was filed. But his family said they were told it was based on a threat to cause physical injury from a comment Matthew made in this Facebook Live video on the evening of January 6.
Before we wrap this up, I just want to clarify all the people that are really concerned thinking that this is over now, that Trump's lost.
It's not over.
It's not over. Trust me. The purpose of today was to expose Pence as a traitor. Yeah. Period.
Yeah, they used a couple of sentences from that video that they took completely out of context. They took Mike Pence is a traitor. It isn't over yet.
As if it was a threat.
And that is the terroristic threat that they were trying to use.
And you had a conversation with the prosecutor. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. There was an operator on the line, and she said, I'm going to have the attorney on the phone with you. I want you to know that you are on a recorded line with several witnesses listening in. I was like, okay. So he gets on the phone, tell him who I was. I said, I am Matthew Perna's aunt. He says, let me start off by saying that there are many people in my department that felt very bad that Matthew decided to take his life. I said, really? I said, there are many people in your department, including you, who are the reason Matthew took his life. He hanged himself because of the people in your department. I said, what exactly about Matt's case warranted a terrorism enhancement? Exactly what did he do? He said, if he just could have waited, I don't think the terrorism enhancement would have stuck with his judge. That infuriated me. And I said, do you not understand? It was the threat of that enhancement that caused my nephew to hang himself. I said, do you not understand these are human beings that you're playing with? You throw out an idle threat that could have taken his sentence from 6 to 12 months to 5 to 6 years. And he hangs himself because of that fear that you instilled And now you're saying you don't think it would have stuck? He said, again, I am very sorry for that your nephew took his life. And I said, I hope that every night before you go to bed, the last thing you think of is the name Matthew Perna and the role you played in his death.
We tried to speak with Nihar Mohanty, but he was unable to comment, and his office disputed Jerry Perna's memory of that call.
There's an old adage, democracy ensures people are governed no better than they deserve. If you don't protest, you don't demand that your elected officials do something about injustice, you're going to be governed with injustice. And you're going to be the victim.
Louis Gohmert was one of the few in Congress, Jerry Perna said, who always made time for her and seemed to care about Matthew. What was it about his case that struck you?
To see somebody that was the victim of our own Department of Justice is just, and especially somebody as peaceable and caring as Matthew obviously was, shame on anybody that doesn't care how the system abused this poor guy. It's just too tragic. We shouldn't have a repeat of that.
Gohmert was on the floor of Congress on January 6, objecting to the certification of results in contested states, his fourth Electoral College vote count in 18 years on the Hill.
It wasn't until January 6, 2021, Republicans objected, and the Democrats are all saying that's a crime for you to object, it's treasonous, seditious, and going, what? We're doing exactly what you did.
And you witnessed that firsthand?
Yeah, and I'm going, this is crazy. You guys did this. So were you being treasonous in 2017, 2005, 2001? It didn't make sense.
Did you have the sense that some of your Republican colleagues were in lockstep with the Democrats on this? I mean, Mitch McConnell and others.
There were Republicans that got mad because we were objecting, yes.
So your own party?
Some
in your own party were not happy with you?
The majority of the Republicans were concerned.
Are you a dying breed, Louis, in the GOP?
I would like to think there are more people in Congress now that will say what they believe than even if it costs them a committee or a chairmanship.
What have we gone from 1% to 2%?
Well, I think there are more now.
When we caught up with Gohmert in the Lone Star State, retirement seemed to have set him free, so we asked a few tough questions about January 6. Do you believe this was a setup, this was an intel operation?
These people came to Washington to protest, but the masses had no intention to be involved in any violence at all.
So you're dodging the question.
No, I do think that a lot of what happened was stirred up by the federal government. All those people that showed up, they showed up of their own accord, but there were people involved that manipulated them.
They were framed.
They were framed.
Thank you. Thank you. No medal. No medal. Thank you, sir. Love you. We love you.
Gohmert served on the Hill for so long, many had forgotten he had served on the bench before that, 10 years as a federal judge in Texas. In his view, Matthew Perna should never have gone to court, let alone prison. From the sit-ins of the Civil Rights era and the Vietnam War, Americans have a long tradition of breaking laws in the name of civil disobedience. And few cities have seen as much resistance as the nation's capital, where Democrats obstructed an official session of Congress for 26 hours on the 22nd of June, 2016.
We will occupy this floor.
Gohmert, who was there, said no one went to prison. What stood out to us in Washington, D.C. was the ease and enthusiasm with which many Republicans tossed their own under the January 6th bus. Gohmert and Marjorie Taylor Greene fought mostly alone to see January 6 prisoners inside the D.C. jail, renamed the Gulag by those inside, whose cries for help were mostly ignored, including veterans and retired law enforcement, some held without trial for 2 years or more. Gohmert said what they found there was a shock.
People needed medical help, and they weren't getting it. One guy had cancer, wasn't getting the treatment. It was just outrageous.
Were any of the prisoners beaten or abused?
Some have been, yes.
Is that normal?
No.
Is it even legal?
No. People don't listen to those that have been jailed.
He lost income. He lost his friendships. He lost his standing in his community. But we stood by Matt as his family because we knew him.
From the stormy streets of D.C. to Mar-a-Lago, where she met with President Trump, to the Hill, where she testified at a field hearing held by Congressman Matt Gaetz, Jerry Perna has made justice for Matthew her full-time job.
I ask you to bring this bill to the table and encourage your constituents to pass it. Please, I ask you, do not let my nephew's death be in vain.
The Matthew Lawrence Perna Act of 2022, written by Louis Gohmert's team to protect nonviolent political protesters on all sides, would end pretrial detention for defendants like Matthew, not charged with violent crimes. But the bill may never become law. So far, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the only member of Congress to co-sign.
The People's House. They call it the People's House. Which people? Not you and me.
Actually, the Founding Fathers did mean you and me.
But it's not what it means now.
No.
That's not what it means.
When we joined Matthew's family in the forest, the pain of his death had not faded. Not for his Uncle Ron, nor for his Aunt Monnie, his mother's identical twin. Matthew had slept at her house nearly every night between his arrest and suicide.
To me, it was just driven. It was just driven to this. And I can't accept this.
Do you think you'll ever accept it?
I believe that God is good, and maybe he said, it's time, Matt. Quit suffering now, come up. You know? I don't know, because I always thought suicide was wrong.
It's hard to see someone you love suffer like that, to that point.
Yeah. I think what really upsets me is I really believe this country was good. And the more and more I see, I don't know that it is.
Do you feel betrayed?
Yeah, I do. And that's why I love Trump. Because finally you have somebody who's willing to stick up for us, normal people, and say they can't trample on you. I won't let them. Because otherwise, hell, we could be next. What's to say they won't come and throw us in jail and say nothing you can do?
Well, some people blame Trump.
I know.
In Matthew's last letters to his family, a suicide note he'd written just for her. I cared too deeply, Aunt Monnie. There was the war, and I chose to fight in it. Hats off to Pelosi and Schumer. Heck of a snare they had me in. Please don't think of me as a coward. I just couldn't handle these feelings, this fear and uncertainty any longer.
And that was Matt, an old soul. Here he is, this guy, he's 5 years younger than me. And he had this quality that my grandfather had. And it was just beautiful.
You miss him?
Oh, yeah.
What do you miss the most?
Just him being there.
It never goes away.
Yeah, I don't expect it will.
For Jerry Perna, in some ways, life stopped when Matthew died. But there was one moment as unexpected as it was comforting, when an honor guard from Ohio stood with them as they said goodbye to Matthew.
And that night of the viewing, there were 2 officers there, and they took turns. And my brother was very confused. We were all confused.
And in shock.
Yeah, we didn't understand why there was an honor guard there.
Just the two of them?
The two of them. The same officers came the next day, and they had an American flag, and they did a flag folding ceremony, and they handed the flag to my brother. And after the funeral, my brother said to them, "I'm so confused. I'm grateful that you came, but Matt wasn't in the service." And they said, "Matt was more of a patriot than most every veteran we've ever done a funeral for." That's what they said. And they handed Larry the flag.